And so there's 100 lights lighting the warehouse space. And imagine one going out every week. So it dulls and dims, but you don't notice. But if somebody had to come and turn them all back on again, you'd suddenly realize, by contrast, how you were living in the dark. And that's what it feels like for a man when your testosterone is compromised. And that can happen for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is diet, our relationship with exercise, our internal psychology, our responses to intimacy, porn, sex, this act of finding our own voice, and then specifically forms of contest. They don't actually have to be physical. There just has to be something in your life where you're bringing it, These can all affect our hormone profile. And the one thing I noticed is that with all of my mastery on mental health, when your hormones are impacted, there's no state of mind, there's no meditation, you don't get on top of that. You don't get on top of that. The effort to get and remain on top of that is compromised because of exactly the critical, vulnerable space in which that hits you. So this insight from my wife, which she had an intuition about and we arrived at and understood and processed together, was that especially for in the context of a woman, if you are struggling with your mental health, you might not even know that there's a cyclic signature to it. And only when you start tracking your cycle do you realize that you're going through these predictable ups and downs. So that's one way in which we became initiated into this idea of honoring cycles in your life. And the other way was, actually, I forget what the other way was. Anyway, but what all that prattling was about is what I'm trying to explain is the sanity making, the sense making structure that you inhabit when you observe cycles. That was the other one. It was in the work context, in agile. In the corporate context, if you're involved in product delivery or solution building or such projects, the smart money these days is not to do the old-fashioned way of all the planning and all the design and then the build and then the testing and then the deployment, because that might be a 9-month arc and then you get to the end of it and you realize you missed some important thing in the beginning. So instead, what they developed is this process called agile. Agile means that you break up your roadmap into these short increments, 2-week increments, 4-week increments. And after every increment, you kind of go through a little ceremonial process. You look back over that last period of time. You figure out what you learned, not just about lessons learned and I should do this better next time, but we thought we were building and designing this, but actually through the building and the making mistakes and the trial and error, we actually learned something about what we want to build or develop instead. Yeah, it's the underlying philosophy of a better way of everything I teach. And this is another way in which you incorporate cycles into your life. And then sexy brain explosion is that why don't you just take that intentionality of agile and match it to a lunar calendar? And now suddenly you've got a way in which to navigate these natural ups and downs that become more predictive and predictable. Therefore, your journey becomes more predictable a little bit. And you just have a little bit more mastery over the change that you're going to experience anyway. That's the idea of it. And then what all this was about was Dimphna and I were watching, I don't know why it is, but we're suddenly being recommended by the algorithm, and we're following some of its recommendations on like Netflix or Amazon Prime or whatever the hell it is. And we're watching shows that are inspired by the Bible or by Christianity or by the Abrahamic religions, basically. So the story of Moses, the story of Exodus. Yeah, it's interesting at the moment. We're exploring that, especially me, my work. Hey, Rowan's here. I was talking about Rowan yesterday. Rowan's on the call. Don't forget to hit that little love heart, guys, so we can teach this infernal algorithm that here is something being said that humans care about. but we've been watching these sort of renditions of Bible stories dramatized on Netflix or whatever, and some of them are pretty good actually. And the reason we watch, of course, is we're trying to decode the mythos of it, because that's where the nugget is. Of course, none of it's to be taken too literally, but you understand that the archetypes and the tropes, and then you try to relay that back and see how that relays back to um, how we could be structuring community, how we could be structuring our own personal journeys, etc. There's just lessons all over in mythology. And one of the lessons that we know happens in the desert, so that we all know the story. Moses comes along and helps the Israelites extricate themselves from this metaphorical circumstance of bondage in Egypt. They come out, but the point is, they've been held in a structure, regardless of the fact that there was bondage. They now have to go from this structured society into forming their own, and they're still kind of pre-adolescent in that maturity arc, in that trajectory. And one of the first things he does in the story, now I don't exactly remember if it was God telling them, but it's immaterial. The idea of God telling Moses what to tell them is the idea of somebody who embodies a teacher or a prophet or any of these kind of archetypal roles that discerns the divine ordering. In other words, the way of things, the way we just explained the lunar cycles, the way we explained the sine curve of life. Somebody notices that pattern and then distills it into this is what we ought to do, and then gives that structuring instruction to the people so that the people can incorporate that, integrate that wisdom, and thereby have an easier way of managing their life. That's what happens in agile projects in the corporate space. That's what now happens in our home to manage our spiritual health and our wellness and the ebb and flow of our energy levels and our moods and everything. We follow a lunar calendar. We honor the cycles, and that literally gives us this ability to have these ceremonial seasonal repetitions. So what you're really doing over a year period is you're giving yourself 12 opportunities to reflect, 12 opportunities to course correct, 12 opportunities to refine what you thought you were aiming at. And ask yourself the question every time, if I had my time again, what would I keep? What would I stop? What would I start? What were my griefs and my losses, my regrets? And what were my triumphs and my wins? I've got to celebrate those too. And then that, basically the smallest increment of that is a day, right? Every morning you wake up, you've got a daily practice, you kind of reset yourself for the day. But our days are so chaotic and demanding, we're often just scrabbling through unless we have personal assistance, Rowan. Then we have people that help us structure our days. But I'm joking, of course. But we're all in community with society, in community with our lives, in community with our work structures, our special relationships, our friends. And so the first gift that Moses, this metaphoric transmitter or shepherd, basically gives to the people. No, before the 10 Commandments, James, it's this instruction of observing the Sabbath. This idea of breaking your life up into these repeatable cycles, wherein there's this formula that you can apply to yourself, and that everybody is in. It's called entrainment. Like if everybody in the village entrains to the cycles, the menstrual cycles of the woman, and they entrain to the cycles of the moon, eventually there's this like metronome tick-tock that everyone can entrain to, and everyone can like find peace and rhythm and cadence in. And that is actually what provides psychological safety for us. It's knowing that, yes, I can go through a day that looks like this, as long as a day that looks like that is going to follow. And what is this idea? It's simply codified in the idea of a Sabbath. And that was yesterday. So that's the day for me when I put down work, where I think of the archetype of Saturn, the things that create my boundaries and my limits, my relationship with time, my relationship with discipline, my inner reflection, a very personal kind of thing, which is why Jewish faith goes to their church on a Saturday. Yeah. which is why they have that don't work rule and such things like that. I think it's too literal, but the general spirit of it is actually very useful in a human life. And what I'm trying to explain is that going forward, when this series ends on Saturdays, what I actually want to do is I want to have a Saturday service, which is more spacious in Rowan's language, more nourishing, but it's a space where that fills exactly what church would, but without the psychological and the spiritual immaturity that can be imposed through such a modality, through such an orthodox or dogmatic structure. So no dogma, but we still want to get together in community. We still want to have a passage read or a poem read or something that reminds us of the better angels of our own natures, that reminds us again how to be kind to ourselves, how to open that door of generosity towards our future waiting self, how to lean against that door, there's just so many reminders that are topical in a week, in a month, in a year. And there's these seasonal markers that I don't want to have to remember them all. I want the rabbi or the pastor or the pastor, not pastor. I want the pastor or that guy. I want him to like hold that space, the shepherd, right? And I like that space. I feel comfortable doing that. That's my natural idiom. And one of the things that I want to do is to hold space like that and remind us all again of that living cadence that we can embody, but without any of the nonsense, right? And multidisciplinary, multi-faith, multivalent, just talking about the human journey and our place in the cosmos and the relationship between those two things and our relationship to each other and to this moment, this unfolding moment. So that long meandering chat was all about that. And then there's a little bit of extra wisdom that we can infer from this, because if Saturday can be given to this Saturnian reflection on time and repetition of cycles and that sensibility, then Sunday can be given to us returning to our ordering principle, the sun. What illuminates our life, what creates order and structure and defines all that movement for us. Monday can be a day in which we orientate ourselves into the ongoing cycle that's already happening. And there's a little adjustment that you can use for Tuesday, for Wednesday, for Thursday, and for Friday. And the nice thing about these is, accidentally or on purpose, human beings have created a kind of a framework, an architecture over 7 days in which we can make room for a lot of the essential psychological stances that we want to occupy within our cycles. And it makes room for each of these. And then each week, we're now at new moon, right? And so there's a relationship between new moon and first quarter moon and full moon and blah, blah, blah. There's a relationship between those and the seasons, like summer, spring, autumn, winter, in which case we can psychologically make intelligent adjustments to our expectations we have on ourselves, to our relationship with starting new things or to winding them down. And there's this beautiful cadence that I teach. And that's actually what we should lead the transmission with, this structured form of it's a kind of human technology. It's a way that we can apply to our own lives to balance the impossible, unbalanceable three corners: our self, our container, and our relationships and our work, and bring them all together. Holistic Mystic Kelly Ann just joined. Kelly, I'm sad to say, I've prattled on for about 15, 20 minutes, and I'm actually winding down. But what we were talking about today was the value of cadence, this feminine sensibility that we can introduce into our life to counter all the masculine sensibility we have about structure and intentionality and all the rest of it. But it's about that weaving. And that's what Tantra means. Yeah? It means weaving. And what are we doing? We're weaving, the shuttle gets put between the warp and the weft. And that's literally how the picture of our life, the tapestry of our life emerges. We're combining the masculine and the feminine sensibilities in this non-gobbledygook, very plain speak, which is the talk about cadences and about honoring cycles and how we integrate and weave them into a life, and then slowly give ourselves the opportunity as individuals, in relationships, as career people, and as citizens of the world to weave all of these things together into a more fulfilling, integrated life, to product manage our own becoming. That's it. Hit me with the love hearts. So what I'm saying quickly here is that when these 20-day lives are over, from there on out on Saturdays, what I'm going to be doing is I'll find a time that actually resonates more. So I might even do it on a Sunday so that an American audience can pick it up on a Saturday. I don't exactly know what I'm going to do yet, but somehow on Saturdays, I want to do a weekly service, a Saturday service, and make it scratch all the itches that we're missing from religion. We can't go back to religions. They're part of our problem. But we definitely need that sense of fellowship. We need that kind of pastoral reminder and pastoral care. We need somebody else holding space for that spiritual shepherding that we actually want to participate in. But somewhere along the line, modern society told you that you have to go find that from 20 podcasts and magically stitch it together inside yourself. And that's actually unrealistic. So what's the remedy to that is like a Saturday service with somebody else holding that space in our community. And that's one of the responses that I'm coming up with that feels right to me. So thanks everyone for participating and coming along and listening and being part of this. It makes such an enormous difference to have people in the room. If you haven't already, please like, subscribe, say something of meaning, wait until the video is posted, comment, just engage. That engagement matters because it helps the infernal algorithm understand that here is something that human beings value. And that's the only language it really understands. So we have to help speak its language so that we can get the internet that we want. But have a beautiful weekend. Maybe give some thought to this resetting opportunity, an invitation that we each have every single week. And then stay tuned and we'll keep talking about how to implement these agile practices in our lives. See ya.